Last week we spoke about Keira Metz, a character present in the early game of The Witcher 3 and who Geralt ultimately decides the fate of as the game plays out. Today, however, I want to talk about a different character who once again Geralt can influence the outcome of, but in a very, very different way. That character is an adversary turned into an ally, Emperor Emhyr Var Emreis. How does this happen? Well, let's get into it. Emperor Emhyr Var Emreis, otherwise known as the White Flame dancing upon the graves of his foes, is a very unique and complex character in the Witcher series. Unlike Keira, he is a main character in The Witcher 3, but is arguably one of the most important characters in the entire Witcher book storyline, as several key events critical to the story would never have happened without his actions or impact. This is a huge character for the Witcher 3 game to handle as a result, but the way they do it by positioning Emhyr carefully as both an ally and an adversary is incredibly key. This allows for a grey area in Geralt and the Emperor's relationship that frame their interactions at key points throughout the game's story. This becomes critical because, like Keira, Geralt can ultimately have a huge impact over the fate of Emhyr Var Emreis. So to start today's video, I would like to talk about what we already know about Emhyr from the book series. This of course will be a somewhat abridged version of what actually happens in the book because there is a lot to cover, particularly when it comes to Emhyr, but I recommend reading the books if you have not done so already. As I mentioned in the introduction, Emhyr is arguably one of the most critical characters to the Witcher book storyline. His father was originally Emperor of Nilfgaard before a usurper took his throne. In the midst of this, a sorcerer cursed Emhyr, turning him into a half hedgehog, or an urchin, later to be called the Urchin of Erlenwald. As an urchin, the curse only gripped him during the day, and at night he would be back to his human form. Emhyr therefore fled Nilfgaard and eventually wound up in Sintra, and saved King Rogner, and invoked the Law of Surprise upon saving him as a reward. Of course, this granted him a gift, and later he turned up on Princess Pavetta's 15th birthday to claim her as his wife, as she was the one betrothed to him through the Law of Surprise. Calanth, the wife of the deceived Rogner and the Queen of Sintra, was furious and ordered the urchin killed. She had hired one Geralt of Rivia to kill him should he appear, but he defended the urchin along with Mousak, who is also known as Ermion. Emhyr the urchin, otherwise known as Duny, was eventually injured, setting off his betrothed, Pavetta, in a sorcerous rage similar to what happens to Ciri in the Battle of Kaer Morhen. And after Geralt and Mousak managed to silence her, the curse was able to be lifted, and Pavetta and Urchin, again known as Duny, were to be wed. Geralt in turn invoked the Law of Surprise on Duny and Pavetta, which is how he became fatefully tied to Ciri. A while after this, Duny eventually conspired with Vilgefortz to take back the throne of Nilfgaard. He aimed to fake his, Pavetta and Cirilla's deaths at sea and then claim back the Nilfgaardian throne, returning as Emhyr Var Emreis. Pavetta became aware of her husband's plans and conspiracy, and smuggled Ciri off of the ship that was to be lost before they departed, causing Emhyr to scuffle with her whilst on the ship, and that led to her falling overboard and drowning to death. Despite being upset about the loss of his wife, faking his death proves to be successful, and Duny, now back being Emhyr Var Emreis, was able to reclaim the Nilfgaardian throne, eliminating and executing all those who had previously stood against him. He had all of his political enemies buried in his ballroom, and their gravestones used to pave the flooring, hence giving him the name the White Flame dancing upon the graves of his foes. Following this, he would instigate and participate in 2 wars between Nilfgaard and the North, 3 if you include the Witcher 3 game canon, using all of these as a vessel to try and find and capture Ciri. Eventually he would track down Cirilla to Stigger Castle, at the same time that Geralt's crew in the books were there fighting Vilgefortz and freeing Yennefer. Geralt is the only person who knows that Emhyr is Duny, and Emhyr informs Geralt that he will be marrying Ciri, which is, of course, incest, and to which Geralt calls him a monster. The Emperor therefore sentences Geralt and Yennefer to death, taking Ciri, but allows them to bathe and spend some final hours together before they are instructed to take their own lives. However, on his retreat from Stigger Castle, he has a change of heart, and lets Cirilla go back to them, Ciri therefore stopping them before they could take their own lives. That is really just a quick summary of the influence that Emhyr has in the books and things that happen during the book. A scratch of the surface of book information about Emperor Emhyr. He is a very complicated, very complex and incredibly key character to the story. So stay tuned for a video on the wars of The Witcher, which is something I've been working on for a while, but it's kind of in the background right now. But for now, back to Emhyr, so let's talk about his character in The Witcher 3. Geralt and Emhyr's interactions actually structure The Witcher 3 itself quite nicely, and operate almost as a spine for the story, holding all of the key elements together. The first of the interactions between the two is immediately after the tutorial area in White Orchard, in an episode in Vizima which sets up the main story, but also provides an understanding for the player that Emhyr and Geralt have a history, but that now the Emperor wishes to hire him to find his daughter, ultimately starting the proper side of the game. This initial conversation conveys everything the player needs to know about Var Emreis' character, that he is a ruthless pragmatist, hence he is hiring Geralt in the first place, but also that he is demanding, strict, and incredibly powerful. Following this, you do not then interact with Emhyr directly until you are summoned to him after finding Uma. The Emperor is frustrated at this point that you have not yet found Ciri and is offended to be presented with Uma, even noting that although you were busy, you have achieved very little. This begins to increase tensions between the two even higher, and impacts whether or not Geralt makes his very next key decision. You can request Var Emreis' support during Brothers in Arms, where you try to get support for the Battle of Kaer Morhen, but he ultimately refuses to let his troops be led by a Witcher, and so no support or help is given. The next decision given is after the battle. Geralt can influence Ciri to go and visit her father before heading to the Sabbath to kill Imlerith, and 2/3 of the crones. If he does so, this opens the path to Cirilla potentially ascending to the throne itself. And during the conversation, the Emperor is surprised that Geralt kept his word and presents him with his reward, which you can either accept or refuse in front of Ciri. Regardless of whether or not you did this optional interaction, the next time you will see Emhyr is on his boat, as he has sailed to claim Skellige for Ciri. You board his boat and demand on behalf of Yennefer that he release Fringilla Vigo, who is another of Geralt's old flames, and remind him that he pledged to grant amnesty to the Lodge of Sorceresses. In conversation, he is not particularly talkative about this subject, and although states that he will abide by the agreement, as loosely as that sounds. If Ciri ultimately decides to become a Witcher, or if Nilfgaard is defeated by either Radovid or Dijkstra depending on your outcome of Reason of State, then at the end of the game Geralt will go to Emhyr and lie. He will tell him that the White Frost killed Ciri, and that she did not speak about him before she died. The very last interaction between the two is Emhyr telling Geralt that he does not wish to see him ever again, a very poignant and strong end to the relationship between the two in The Witcher 3. Incidentally, Yennefer also leaves the Imperial Court regardless of the romance options you choose in the game. These interactions are ultimately very interesting because Geralt has a significant influence on Emhyr's fate, but these actual interactions themselves do not impact it. Geralt can be as insolent as he likes when talking to the Emperor, something that is not afforded to basically anybody else, because it does not cost him his life. The Emperor is incredibly powerful, but these interactions show how much he needs Geralt because of the pressures of the war back home and the need to find Cirilla to solve this problem. Before going on to talk about Geralt's influence on Emhyr's fate, I would like to briefly discuss why Emhyr's character is so interesting and compelling to me personally. I find that in all kinds of media, be it television, games, or films, the characters that are most interesting to me are the ones that are placed in a grey area with regards to their relationships to the main character or characters. What I mean by this is in the title. The grey area between the alliance and adversary that Emhyr fits into perfectly during the game is part of what makes the interactions described so interesting. He is not present for large parts of the game, but his dialogue, actions and interactions have an impact and are felt throughout the game world. This is partially down to voice acting, which I will discuss in a moment, but it's also the kind of character that Emhyr is, as a ruthless pragmatist. You do not need any book knowledge as a player to see the kind of ruler he is, and that is through the world building. It is also interesting that because he's a ruler, you see these values transferred through his vassals, ambassadors, countrymen, and of course through his soldiers throughout the game. Geralt has many interactions with them on his travels, particularly in the early part in Velen, and this gives the player an idea of the kind of leader that Var Emreis is. There is a parallel in this adversarial allyship element to another game that I love and have also previously talked about on the channel, that being Mass Effect. The obvious one in that series is the role of the Elusive Man from the second game, but there is also an argument to be made that a similar relationship builds between Shepard and the Council in the first game of the Mass Effect series too. It's certainly an interesting parallel, and Emhyr's character is so complex and far-reaching that a lot of elements go into deciding his fate. And as I discussed in my Reason of State video, it's also very bold of the game to give you influence over the state of the world like that, and one of its most key characters. So how does Geralt influence Emhyr's fate? Well, during the game it is no secret that trade is suffering at the expense of the Emperor's conquest north, and as long as there is victory he has support, but stalemate and defeat would be potentially costly and end Var Emreis' reign. It is one of the key reasons he is asking you to seek Ciri in the first place. He wants to cede the throne to her. It's this key bit of information that Geralt can actually tell Dijkstra that starts off the Reason of State quest entirely, the actual quest itself. And that quest ultimately has an impact on Emhyr's fate. Miss it, leaving Radovid in charge, or do it and get Dijkstra in charge of the north, and Emhyr will be assassinated, and not cede the throne to Cirilla. However, completing the quest and siding with the Temerian leaders in Roche, Vez and Tala, and Var Emreis will win. And then, depending on if Ciri is convinced to visit Emhyr, either he will continue as Emperor, once again hanging all those who were against him, or instead Ciri will ascend to the throne and become the Empress. Therefore, Geralt, by actually participating in more quests and ones he probably wouldn't do as a character, can save Emhyr's life, making him influential over the outcomes of both Emhyr but also his daughter, which is obviously the subject of the main quest itself. I also wanted to take a moment to note how well they did in the voice casting of Emhyr. Charles Dance is a perfect fit for the role, mostly because of his tone and the weight and emphasis he is able to put on the dialogue as a result. It's obvious that there are quite a lot of similarities between Dance's previous role as Tywin Lannister in Game of Thrones, which must have been in CDPR's minds when they cast the English voice actor. Both characters convey a lot of power in their dialogue, just their dialogue alone, never mind their actual actions, and Dance's voice is the perfect fit for that. In summary, Emperor Emhyr's character is an incredibly interesting one. The game manages to handle such an important book character very well by making the direct interactions between the Emperor and Geralt few but impactful, or using world building and interactions with Emhyr's subjects to give an understanding of his character and what type of ruler he is. Emhyr is interestingly posed as both an ally and an adversary. Without him you would not have found any intel on Ciri in the first place, but this comes at the price of potentially handing her over to him at the conclusion of the game. While, like Keira Metz, Geralt ultimately decides Emhyr's fate, this is not done directly or in direct dialogue as it is with Keira. It is actually done through other quests that ultimately alter the fate of the continent, because there are political machinations at play. Overall then, while the direct interactions are few and far between, each is very impactful. It almost acts as the spine of the main story, and as mentioned in my video on Reason of State, it is incredibly bold of the game to let you decide the outcome of the continent, of its politics. This includes deciding the fate of Emhyr Var Emreis, when he is such an important character in the entire Witcher story, from books all the way into the games too. So what do you think of Emperor Emhyr, and what outcomes do you prefer for the state of the continent? Let me know down in the comments below. I'd love to read your opinions. Thanks once again for watching. If you have a moment, please check out the video that's on screen. It's another character deep dive into Keira Metz and how Geralt can influence her fate. So please take a look at that if you have the time. With that being said, please like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video, it really helps me out. And peace.
Witcher, I do not wish to see you ever again.